So
Okay, we are up to chapter 3. We'll do a quick recap of what we did yesterday.
Yeah, non sequitur.
Oh no, we did chapter 3 yesterday. You're right, we're up to chapter 4.
I walked out of chapter 3.
Okay, so listen to the recap. Okay, so first we talked about the last verses of this week's Torah portion, which is actually the last verses of the entire book of the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus, of Shemos. And the last two verses after the Torah portion deals with the construction of the tabernacle, the sanctuary, the traveling temple in the desert. Then the last two verses talk about the travels of how the Jews traveled with the clouds. When the clouds moved, the Jews would travel. So our question is, how does this fit in over here? It's nothing to do with it's not part of the details of the construction. And the main section of where the travel is taking place is in a different portion of the Torah, where it goes out more at length about the details of how the Jews traveled with the clouds. And even though we have an explanation from one of the commentaries that it's telling us, in a continuation with the theme of the God's presence rested in the temple, so it tells us that the Shekhinah would dwell in the temple until they had to travel, and then the cloud would move on. But we don't like that explanation, because we're not talking about the God's presence in the temple in these verses. It's strictly talking about the travels. So what does traveling have to do with the building of the temple? Furthermore, to strengthen this question, next week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the third book of the Torah, Vayikra, it starts off that God calls to Moshe. And the Medrash says this is in continuation with the verses before these last two verses about the travels, that God's presence appeared in this temple. And now from there, God's calling to Moshe. So that strengthens the question of these two verses are like interrupting a continuation. You have the subject of God's presence in the temple, and then it continues with God calling to Moshe from there. So this idea of the clouds moving and the Jews traveling is unrelated, and it's interrupting the flow. So what's it doing over here? That was our question. So we said the detail, the main crux of the answer, which we'll have to still explain. The main crux of the answer is that theme of the next week's Torah portion, of the next book of the Torah, Vayikra, all about the sacrifices, is in continuation to this week's Torah portion of how God's presence was in the temple, and that has to do specifically with the fact that the Shekhinah departed from the temple and the Jews traveled. That idea of the Shekhinah departing and the Jews traveling, that shows us somehow, we'd have to explain how, that shows us how the Shekhinah came to be in the temple. Okay, so we have to explain that. But the preface, we started
how the Shekinah came to be in the temple.
Yeah, there's the detailed description of the building of the temple.
I know that, and the Shekinah rests within the temple.
Right.
That we need something more than that.
So we're going to need something more than that.
Oh,
yeah, we have to. We didn't explain it. We didn't elaborate. We kind of just. It's not.
Why we didn't get into so why did Shekinah decide to rest there? Was that what you're saying? I'm not sure I know what you're saying.
Maybe you should listen and find out.
All right.
Ooh.
The Shekhinah
Have a good day.
That was in the temple after they built it. The continuation of that with the sacrifices of the method of worship in the temple that has to do somehow with the Shekhinah departing the temple and the Jews traveling. I don't know. I didn't. We'll get to it at section 8.
So it's like a mystery.
Way ahead. We're only on section 4.
No, what I'm just trying to say is that
it kind of like says like a snippet, but without elaborating.
and then the rep is bugged by it, right?
And
So
then-
he's bugged by that. Every one of us would never pay any attention to it.
So when we get to section 8, we'll be able to elaborate on that and come back in.
Sorry, Tony.
Okay,
Okay.
Usually
Chapter
kind of
4.
give you a section 8, Jack, you know what that is?
that's right. Limited abode for the unlimited.
One second. So before this,
sorry.
to answer this question, we have to preface with a whole nother question and a whole nother topic. And that is the connection of the beginning to the end. In Judaism, the end is the beginning is always connected. So we're finishing up a book of the Torah over here. So the end of this book of the Torah has to be connected to the beginning of the book. What's the beginning of the book? The beginning of the Parsha Shemos starts off with the words, and these are the names of the children of Israel, of children of Jacob that came down to Egypt. And it goes through the names. So what's interesting is that both the beginning and the end are similar concepts about counting. We're counting the children of Jacob in the beginning of the book. They came down to Israel, to Egypt. And we're counting them. In fact, the name of this week's Parsha, Pikudei, means accounting, because it details the totals of the donations and all the materials that were needed to build the temple. That's what the word means. So they both deal with counting. What's perplexing is that the deeper meaning of the counting in the beginning seems to be opposite of what accounting is. Counting is something that's limited in nature. You're counting something specific. You can't count infinite. Counting, by definition, means that you have a limited amount, and you need to count to see how much that is. However, in the beginning of the when it says these are the names, so why are we talking? Why does the Torah need to tell us their names of the sons of Jacob? We know his names already from before. So the Rashi tells us, because it brings out how precious we are to God. So the God counts us again because we're compared to the stars. And the theme of the counting is the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. That's what the beginning of the Torah portion is all about. They're going down to Egypt, and it's talking about the whole story of the Exodus. In English, the second book of the Torah is called Exodus, because that's the main theme of what the book is about. So our question is that seemingly the idea of counting is the opposite of the idea of redemption. Redemption implies breaking free of all the boundaries, breaking free of limitations. And counting implies limiting yourself to whatever is being counted. This question we have not only in the general aspect of the general theme of the whole book, but we have it within the beginning of the book and within the end of the book. The paradox in the beginning is that we, on one hand, we have the limited idea of counting, but on the other hand, we see that the Jews were very proliferated, and that's we got into the discussion of how many babies, 6 babies at a time, and they had so many people so fast. So that's kind of the opposite of limited in nature. We see how abundant they were. So that's how we see the opposite idea in the beginning. In the end, in this week's portion, we also have this paradox. On one hand, we have the limited nature of the counting of the utensils. On the other hand, it ends off with God's presence was so unlimited, unbridled, powerfully intense that even Moses couldn't withstand that, and he wasn't able to enter the tent of meeting when God's presence was dwelling there. So we have an infinitely powerful experience of God's presence in the temple, yet the name of the portion is about counting the materials, the limited materials that were needed to build it. So we have this paradox again. Once again, are we talking about something limited in nature or something infinite? So after we understand the answer to this, then we'll understand back to our first question. Okay, now up to chapter 4. Joey.
Limited abode for the unlimited. To clarify, in general terms, the ultimate goal is indeed to reach the level beyond limits, redemption. which is beyond worldly dimensions and constraints. However, the intent is not to thereby abrogate limitations.
What does abrogate mean?
Do away with.
Okay.
Rather, the goal is that the unlimited and the limited should be fused together. We find a similar idea regarding the population of Jewish people. As the verse says, the number of children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall be neither measured nor counted. Meaning the number itself will be neither measured nor counted. It's interesting because I thought it was the stars in the sky.
There's both of the things.
Okay.
It's in the Torah. Yeah.
Okay. Again, we're talking literally. What does shall not be counted mean? Because every year they count with the shekels, the population.
So with the shekels, it's actually on a very literal sense. We learn from there that you don't count Jews directly.
You're counting.
You're counting the shekels. And even when like you would say you count for a minion, so you don't say 1, 2, 3. You say, there's different ways of saying it. You
Well,
say
there's
not,
4 over here
you
and
say-
there's 6 over there.
sometimes people use a verse that has 10 words. So
Yeah.
Shia Samacha, sometimes they say not 1, not 2, not
Okay.
3.
All right, I understand.
Because but yeah, we learn
You
from
don't
there that
count.
you don't count. You don't count.
Interesting.
Yep.
And similarly, we find a similar idea in the Similarly, regarding the Mishkan, the resting of the Shekinah, which transcended fixed dimensions and limits, happened within the confines of the furnishings of the Mishkan, which was counted and measured as discussed. Since the supernal intent of creation was that Hashem desired to have an abode in the lower realms, these two goals have to be accomplished. A, there has to be an abode for him, for Hashem's essence, which is completely beyond the world. And B, the abode must be in the lower realms, in this physical world, a level so low that there is none lower than, specifically a world with fixed dimensions and limits.
Okay, so we have.
Wow.
This is getting deep stuff over here.
Yeah.
So the ultimate purpose of creation, Chassidus explains to us, is to make an abode for God in this physical world. That's what God desired. He has this desire to have a home in this lowly world. And for that reason, he made the world, so he can have a home in this world. That's why he made this. So it's something that transcends logic. It's something it was his desire that transcends logic. There are other reasons given for the creation of the world that are based on logic, but those aren't the ultimate reasons. This is the ultimate reason. And this ultimate reason incorporates two aspects. On one hand, it's a home for God. On the other hand, it's in this lowly world. To be a home for God, that means the home for God's essence, which is totally higher than the world. And at the same time, it had to be within where is the home to take place? Within the limitations of the time and space of this world. So again, we're fusing these two ideas. We're taking the infinite and bringing it out into the finite. And that's the ultimate purpose of the world. Okay. Chapter 5. Who wants to continue?
Okay. These two above mentioned goals, an abode for Hashem's essence, and that this abode be in the lower realms, are expressed broadly through the difference between Jewish souls and the world. The deeper meaning of an abode for Hashem is specific for Hashem's essence to specifically reside in the Jewish souls, for the Jewish collective to serve as an abode for him. Since the Jewish people and Hashem are all one, Jews are therefore the ultimate abode for Hashem's essence, as they are one entity with the essence.
So we see the Jewish soul is one essence with God himself. It's one thing. Everything else in the world, all of creation, is all created by God. but we don't say it's part of God himself. And even souls, spiritual things, and even angels, they're all created by God. Yeah.
Oh, did you want to talk, Moshe? Oh, he was just waving.
So, are you able to hear me, Moshe?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just muted here. There's some
Okay.
background.
Yeah, so that is something uniquely special about the Jewish people's soul, that it's part of God himself. And that's why it's the proper home for God in this lowly world, because a Jew's soul was sent down into this world in a body, in the physical limitations of time and space. And here it could be God's presence is revealed.
But still, this abode must take place specifically in the lower realms as a result of a Jew's divine service.
You skip the brackets.
Where?
In contrast.
Oh, I'm sorry. In contrast, Hashem's abode in the lower realms, as it applies to the world, is only realized by the world's recognition that its entire existence is only a result of Hashem's essence, and that without him actively willing it to be, nothing exists whatsoever.
In other words, the way the rest of the world is able to unite with God is by realizing that they're nothing without God. That their whole existence is totally, utterly dependent on God every second. And that's by negating their existence, that's where, I should say, independent existence, that's where God's essence is able to be revealed. The Jew's soul is different. It's able to unite with God. It's able to actually be a home for God. It doesn't have to negate its independent existence, because its independent existence is one with God. You don't need to say, we're talking about yourself and your body. You don't need to negate one arm in order to feel the other arm. It's all part of the same person. So that's why it's able to be. It has a unique level of unification with God.
But still, this abode must take place specifically in the lower realms as a result of a Jew's divine service in this lowly physical world, transforming physical things into vessels for godliness. Only by accomplishing this does the source of the Jewish people's souls, which are united with Hashem's essence, become revealed. Put differently, when does it become apparent that the Jews are an abode for Hashem, that they are absolutely unified with essence without any limitations or impediments? Only when the limitations and fixed dimensions of the lower realms do not constitute an obstacle, but rather the lower realms themselves become, by the divine service of the Jews, a befitting place for his abode.
So in other words, we can't, even though the home for God is within the Jewish soul, but that only takes place after and through a Jew doing his work in this world and transforming the work into a home for God, into elevating it.
Doing mitzvahs and studying
Doing
Torah.
mitzvahs and studying Torah, exactly. Before a Jew does that, then it's not revealed within him his soul and how it's one with God. So by transforming the physical world around and making that a home for God, that is then able to reveal the soul that's in the person and reveal the home for God in them.
Okay.
So we're talking about the fusions of opposites over here. We're talking about we need to take the limited physical objects of this world that are inherently limited and constrained and defined, and transform them, elevate them into something infinite, into a mitzvah, something holy, connected with God. And that then takes the soul, which is inside a limited, constrained body, and elevate that and connect that with the infinite as well, and make that a home for God's infinite inside the world. Okay, we'll continue this theme tomorrow, but based on this idea that we just discussed today, we're able to go and answer how the end of the portion connects with the beginning.
Okay. Quick question about the 70.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so let me just
Oh,
stop
I'm
the
sorry.
recording over here. Have a good day, Moshe.
Thank you.